It was still early when the sun lifted over the city, painting the sky in soft gold and pink. The airport parking lot was already busy, with cars pulling in and out like waves. Inside the main terminal, people rolled suitcases behind them and tried not to spill their morning coffee as they hurried toward security. In the middle of all this movement walked a quiet woman named Elaine Parker. She carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder and a small suitcase that slid smoothly across the floor. Elaine had learned long ago to keep her expressions soft when she traveled. Airports had a way of making everyone tense, and she did not like adding to that energy. She had an easy smile, the kind that made strangers feel like they had met her before, even if they had not. Her clothes were simple and comfortable. She blended in, but there was still something calm and steady about the way she moved, as if she had learned to stay centered no matter how busy life became. Her flight was early, and the building still smelled like fresh cleaning solution mixed with roasted coffee beans. She took a deep breath and tried to enjoy the small quiet moments before the crowds grew louder. Today's trip was not for a holiday, but she didn't mind. Travel had become part of her life. She followed the signs to the check-in counters. The line for regular passengers was already long, stretching like a slow river around the stanchions. But Elaine walked toward the shorter priority line, the one meant for travelers with special status or tight schedules. She had been there before many times. She knew the routine and had always handled it politely. 2 airline staff members stood at the counter. They were busy, but not overwhelmed. The first one glanced at Elaine and then back at the computer. The second worker leaned toward the first and whispered something. They shared a small laugh. It was quiet, but not invisible. Moments like this were always hard to read. Sometimes they were harmless and sometimes they were not. Elaine stepped forward when it was her turn. Her voice was warm but calm as she greeted them. She set her ID and ticket confirmation on the counter. She expected the usual check-in questions. Instead, the staff member looked at her and then down at the documents, then back again with a small raised eyebrow. "This line is for priority passengers," the worker said. The tone wasn't harsh. It was soft, but it carried a hint of doubt, as if Elaine must not have understood the sign she had just walked past. "Yes," Elaine replied gently. "That's me. Thank you." The second staff member gave a small smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. "We just want to make sure people are in the right place," they added, in a way that felt more like a warning than simple clarity. Elaine nodded. She had heard similar words before in many different places. She didn't argue. She simply waited as the first staff member typed slowly on the keyboard. People behind her shifted in line. Someone coughed. A child nearby asked for a snack again and again. The worker clicked a few more times and then asked the same question again about her status, even though the answer had already been given. Elaine repeated herself calmly. She kept her voice level and respectful because she believed that kindness mattered, even when it wasn't returned right away. But small signs kept stacking up like pebbles in a jar. The staff members spoke to each other about her as if she were not standing there. Their tone was light, almost joking, but it felt dismissive. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was just enough to make the air feel heavier. Elaine tried not to let her shoulders tighten. She had worked hard over the years to protect her peace. But she also cared deeply about fairness and respect. She believed everyone deserved that, from the first passenger in line to the last. As the minutes passed, the line behind her grew longer. A few people started to notice that something small, but real, was happening. Not a scene. Not an argument. Just a slow drip of doubt aimed at one quiet traveler who had done nothing wrong. Elaine continued to answer questions politely. She did not mention anything about her work or who she was beyond the ticket and ID sitting on the counter. She preferred people to treat her kindly because it was the right thing to do, not because of where she worked or what title she carried. The staff members, however, seemed stuck in their assumptions. They spoke to other passengers differently. Lighter, friendlier, more open. But with Elaine, their voices carried a tighter edge. It wasn't loud or rude. It was just different enough for her to notice. She took another slow breath. Travel was never only about planes and luggage. It was about how people treated one another when they were busy, tired, or distracted. And sometimes that revealed more than anyone expected. She stayed patient. She stayed present. She did not match coolness with coolness. She kept her respect. Inside, though, there was a small ache. Not anger. Not outrage. Just sadness that these moments still happened in quiet ways. The airport announcement system chimed above them, and a soft voice read out flight numbers. A luggage cart rolled by with a squeaky wheel. The morning light through the high windows made tiny reflections on the polished floor. Life continued around them like a river flowing past a stone. And Elaine, standing there with dignity, was that stone. Steady, grounded, unmoving. She believed in grace, but she also believed in truth. And soon, the truth about who she was, and how she should have been treated from the very first moment, would gently shift the air in the room in a way nobody at that counter could ignore. Part 1 ends with her still standing there, calm as ever, while the story quietly builds toward the moment that will change not only the tone of the morning, but the way the people around her think about respect, fairness, and the value of every traveler who walks up to a counter simply hoping to be treated with care. The line behind Elaine grew a little longer, and the soft sounds of the airport wrapped around her like background music. Rolling bags clicked over the tile floor. A nearby coffee grinder hummed. A family spoke in gentle voices while trying to keep their sleepy children awake. Life kept moving, but the air at the counter still felt tense in a way that only a few people noticed. The first staff member stared at the screen for a long time, as if the computer were refusing to give up its secrets. But the truth was simple. Everything on the screen was correct. Her ticket was valid. Her status was valid. Her place in the line was valid. It just seemed hard for them to accept that. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" the worker asked again, even though the answer had already been given twice. Elaine didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply nodded in the same calm way she always did. "Yes, this is the correct line." The worker gave a thin smile and turned to the coworker. They spoke in low voices that were meant to sound professional, but didn't quite make it there. There was a small shrug, a look, a tiny laugh that faded just as quickly as it came. Someone in line shifted their bag and watched quietly, as if trying to make sense of something they didn't want to judge too soon. A man near the back frowned, not at anyone in particular, but at the strange way the mood had changed in the space of a few minutes. A supervisor walked past the counter carrying a stack of papers. The first staff member called out lightly, "We may need to double-check something here." The words were ordinary. The tone was not. It carried doubt, the kind that hangs in the air longer than it should. The supervisor didn't stop. "Handle it," they said, but with a distracted smile, as if everything happening was small and unimportant. Elaine kept her hands folded loosely on the counter. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence said more than words. But silence also had a weight. It could either calm a moment or deepen the discomfort inside it. Today it did a bit of both. She thought about all the airports she had passed through in her life. She remembered kind staff in small towns who treated every traveler like family. She remembered busy hubs where people rushed like they were running late for life itself. And she remembered moments like this. Quiet, polite, but edged with doubt that did not need to be there. The second worker turned back to her with a question she had already answered twice. "Do you have proof of your priority status?" "Yes," she said gently. "It should be showing on your screen. But I can also give you the email confirmation." She scrolled through her phone slowly, letting them see the details. She did not rush. She did not wave it around. She laid the phone on the counter like an offering of patience. The worker leaned in, studied it, nodded slowly, then shot a look to the first staff member. "It says priority," they whispered. "I know," the first worker said softly, their voice unsure now, but instead of apologizing and moving on, they stalled. They clicked a few more windows. They asked for her ID again even though it was still lying right there. They retyped her name. They rechecked the spelling. They created more steps than the process needed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no argument, just a slow drizzle of doubt, each drop falling in a way that most people would have ignored if they weren't paying attention. Elaine stood there like a tree in gentle rain, rooted, steady, and still. She wasn't made of stone. She could feel the discomfort. She could feel the quiet question behind their eyes. Does she really belong here? But she didn't let it sink into her heart. She had worked too hard to protect that space. One of the passengers in line leaned forward just enough to see what was going on. A woman near the front gave Elaine a small, encouraging smile, the kind strangers share when words might make things worse. A teenager tugged at their parent's sleeve and whispered, "Why are they taking so long?" The parent shushed them softly, unsure how to explain. Finally, the computer chimed with a sound that meant everything was fine. It had always been fine. The worker paused, almost surprised, then looked up. "You do have priority," they said, as though the truth had been hiding. "Yes," Elaine replied, the same calm tone as before. No sarcasm, no sharpness, just truth sitting there gently, not trying to win anything. The staff members suddenly became more formal. Their voices sharpened like they did when speaking to someone important, but the warmth still wasn't there. It was efficiency without empathy. They printed her boarding pass, set it on the counter, and slid it toward her. "There you go," the first worker said, as if the pause, the doubt, and the delay were just part of the normal process. But this moment wasn't over, because the second worker, perhaps trying to lighten the air, made a small comment under their breath. It wasn't meant to hurt. It wasn't meant to travel. But sometimes words do that. They slip past lips and slide through air until they land where they shouldn't. "Some people think they're more important than they are," they muttered, almost playful. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. Elaine felt the words land in the space between them. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the worker, not angry, but deeply human. That look wasn't sharp. It wasn't cold. It simply asked a question. "Why would you assume that about me?" The worker blinked, suddenly aware of what had been heard. The room seemed to hold its breath. A soft announcement echoed from the speaker somewhere, naming a flight that had nothing to do with any of them. Elaine could have responded in many ways. She could have snapped back. She could have raised her voice. She could have demanded a manager. She did none of those things. Instead, she spoke with the kind of calm that comes from years of learning when to speak and when to wait. "I don't think I'm more important than anyone else," she said in a soft voice. "I'm just asking to be treated the same as every other traveler." There was no anger in the words, just honesty. And honesty has a way of moving into the cracks people don't expect. The worker's face softened. A bit of color rose to their cheeks. They swallowed as if they were trying to take the words back. "I didn't mean," they started, then stopped, not knowing how to finish. The first worker said nothing. They stared at the boarding pass as if hoping it could rescue them. Elaine picked up the paper and her phone. She didn't rush. She didn't glare. She simply took a moment to breathe. The woman in line who had smiled earlier looked at her again, this time with quiet respect. The truth was simple. No scene had been made. No rules had been broken. But a lesson had still been written into the air, even if only a few people had read it. Elaine turned to leave the counter and almost stepped away. But then she stopped. Not to lecture. Not to scold. Just to add something soft to the moment. "I travel a lot," she said gently. "And I know this job can be hard. But sometimes the little things we say or do can change how someone feels for the rest of the day." Her voice was like warm tea, steady, grounding, kind. The second worker nodded slowly, eyes lowered. "You're right," they said. "I'm sorry." The first worker gave a small nod too, still quiet, still thinking. Maybe, just maybe, a small shift was happening, like clouds moving to let a little sunlight through. Elaine thanked them with the same grace she had walked in with. Not because she felt she had to, but because that was who she was. She lifted her bag and rolled her suitcase toward the security line, her steps unhurried. As she walked away, a few people in line watched her go. Not out of curiosity, but out of reflection. They had seen something subtle, something that didn't come with loud arguments or dramatic exits. They had seen what dignity looked like when it chose not to shout. What they didn't know yet was that the story wasn't over. because the truth of who she was, something she kept quiet not out of secrecy, but out of humility, would soon rise to the surface like a slow sunrise. And when that happened, the moment at the counter would return to the minds of those who had been there. Not to embarrass anyone, not to punish, but to remind every person in that airport that respect should never come from a title or a badge or a place in line. It should start from the heart, right from the very first hello. Elaine moved slowly through the terminal, rolling her suitcase beside her as she joined the security line. The lights above glowed soft and steady, and the quiet hum of airport life wrapped around her again. People talked about gate numbers and boarding times. A child laughed at something small and silly. A service dog trotted calmly beside its handler, tail low and relaxed. But even as she took her place in line, the weight of what had just happened still sat gently on her shoulders. It wasn't heavy like anger. It was more like a faint echo that wouldn't disappear right away. She didn't want it to ruin her day, but she also didn't want to pretend it didn't exist. The line moved slowly forward. Shoes came off. Laptops went into trays. People made the little choices that travel always demanded. When it was her turn, Elaine went through the motions with quiet ease. She placed her bag in the bin, slipped out of her shoes, and stepped through the scanner with steady steps. The security officer greeted her with a kind nod. She nodded back, grateful for simple politeness. When she finished, she gathered her things and found a quiet spot near the gate area. She liked to arrive early so she could breathe before boarding. The chairs were arranged in neat rows, most of them filled with travelers who looked half awake. A big window stretched across the wall, showing the runway, where planes glided about like giant birds preparing to lift into the sky. Elaine sat down, smoothed her jacket, and took out a small notebook. She always carried one, not for work meetings or formal notes, just thoughts, reflections, little reminders of what her heart wanted to hold on to. She wrote only a few words. Stay grounded. Stay kind. Speak when needed. Then she closed the notebook and rested her hands on it. A few minutes later, the familiar sound of rolling wheels came from behind her. She didn't turn at first. Airports were full of that sound. But then she heard a voice. It belonged to one of the staff members from the check-in counter. "Excuse me," the worker said, voice softer than before. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Elaine looked up gently. Her eyes were calm, though there was still a quiet sadness inside them. "Of course," she said. The worker shifted, nervous now. The energy had changed. There was no trace of doubt anymore. Instead, there was hesitation and maybe even a little regret. "I just wanted to check something," they said. "You mentioned priority status earlier. Could I see your ID one more time?" The supervisor asked us to confirm some details. There was no edge in the words now, just careful respect. Elaine paused, not because she was offended, not because she wanted to make a point. She simply wanted to be sure she moved with intention. Then she reached calmly into her bag and pulled out a slim wallet. Inside it, tucked neatly among a few cards, was one that didn't look like the others. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't a credit card. It was an official identification card, clear and formal, with the seal of the United States and the words United States Senator printed across the front. Her photo was there, right beside her name. She handed it to the staff member with the same grace she had carried all morning. The worker's eyes widened just slightly, then softened. Not with fear, not with shock that demanded drama. More like the gentle realization that they had misunderstood something important. That the picture in their mind had been incomplete. I see," the worker said quietly, almost to themselves. The card wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It simply spoke the truth in quiet letters. At that moment, the supervisor who had been called earlier walked up as well. They glanced at the card, then at Elaine, then at their team member. The puzzle pieces came together. And for the first time since the counter, the staff didn't just see a traveler. They saw a whole person with a story they had never bothered to ask about. But the beauty of the moment wasn't that Elaine held a title. It was that she had never used it to demand respect. She had only asked to be treated as a fellow human being. The supervisor cleared their throat softly. "Thank you for showing us this," they said. "And thank you for your patience earlier." Their tone was sincere now, not rushed, not dismissive, just honest. Elaine smiled the same gentle smile she always had. "You're welcome," she said. "And thank you for coming to talk with me." Silence settled for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply the quiet that happens when people understand something important at the same time. The staff member looked down for a second, then back up. "I want to apologize for how things felt earlier," they said. "We should have trusted the information in front of us. And we should have spoken more kindly. We're sorry." The words didn't erase the morning, but they mattered. They held care, and care always mattered. Elaine nodded gently. "I appreciate that. And I understand that this job can be stressful. But sometimes small moments can sit with people longer than we realize. So thank you for taking the time to talk now." Her voice didn't hold blame. It held hope. Nearby, a few passengers listened without trying to. Not all of them understood what was happening, but some did. And the lesson floated through the quiet seats like a soft breeze. Respect is not something we give because of titles. It is something we give because we all share the same sky. The supervisor asked if there was anything they could do to make the rest of her travel easier. She thanked them again but said she was fine. She didn't want special treatment. She only wanted fairness. They returned her card with both hands, a small gesture of respect. She slipped it back into her wallet, not as a badge of power, but as part of the life she had chosen to serve others. After the staff left, Elaine sat for a while longer, just breathing. The window still showed the wide runway, stretching out like a promise. A plane lifted into the air, wings catching the light, and for a moment the world felt large and full of possibility again. She thought about the morning, not with bitterness, but with reflection. She wanted to remember it, not because of the discomfort, but because of the gentle ending, the apology, the shift, the chance for growth. A little later, an elderly couple sat beside her. They didn't know who she was. They only knew kindness when they saw it. They chatted with her about the weather and how airports used to be quieter years ago. They laughed softly about getting lost in terminals and missing signs. Elaine listened with real interest. She loved hearing people's stories. She believed everyone carried a small world inside them, one worth honoring. When the boarding call finally came over the speakers, she rose with the other travelers. She lined up like everyone else, standing shoulder to shoulder with people heading to work, to weddings, to reunions, to new beginnings. The gate agent scanned her pass with a warm smile. "Have a wonderful flight," they said. "You too," Elaine replied, meaning it. As she walked down the jet bridge, the soft hum of the engines grew louder. The metal floor echoed beneath her steps. She felt lighter now, as if the sky above her had opened a little wider. She didn't think about titles. She didn't think about status. She thought about kindness and how powerful it could be when people chose it on purpose. She thought about the staff at the counter and how maybe next time they would pause a little longer before doubting someone. She hoped so, not for herself, but for the countless travelers who would come after her. She found her seat, placed her bag overhead, and settled in. Out the window, the runway stretched straight and strong. A line of planes waited patiently, each one carrying stories, hearts, and hopes. Elaine closed her eyes for a moment and let the rhythm of the engines soothe her. She whispered something to herself, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. Stay grounded, stay kind, speak when needed. The plane began to move, slow at first, then faster, until the ground faded beneath them and the clouds opened their arms. And somewhere in that airport terminal, two staff members went back to their work with a different kind of care in their voices, carrying with them the quiet lesson of a morning that began with doubt and ended with understanding. The story wasn't finished yet. There were still more moments to unfold. But for now, the sky outside the small window felt wide and forgiving, like a new page waiting to be written with gentleness, respect, and the steady belief that every human being deserves to be seen. The plane climbed through soft clouds until the world below looked like a quilt of tiny fields and roads. Inside the cabin, The light dimmed a little, and the steady hum of the engines wrapped everyone in a quiet blanket. Some people slept. Some watched movies. Some scrolled through their phones just to pass the time. Elaine sat by the window, watching the sky shift from pale blue to a deeper shade. Her reflection looked back at her through the glass. Calm, steady, a little thoughtful. The morning at the airport still lived somewhere in her mind, but now it felt less sharp. It was turning into something else. A lesson maybe, or a reminder. The flight attendants came through the aisle offering water and snacks. They were kind, moving with practiced care, asking each person what they needed. When one of them reached Elaine's row, they shared a warm smile and a gentle, "Here you go." Like kindness was the easiest language in the world. Elaine thanked them and sipped her water slowly, letting the cold refresh her. She wasn't someone who rushed through moments. She liked to sit with them and see what they had to say. As the flight continued, she thought about how strange it was that respect could shift so quickly. One moment she was doubted. The next, once her title was known, the tone changed. She didn't want her life to be like that. She didn't want doors to open only because of a badge or a position. She wanted people to see the person first. She remembered what she had said earlier about small words lasting longer than people realized. She wondered if the staff members were still thinking about that morning too. Maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. But she hoped that somewhere deep down, a seed had been planted. The plane began to descend after a while, tilting gently as the clouds thinned and the ground returned in soft patches of green and gray. Houses appeared, then cars, then highways winding like long ribbons. When the wheels touched the runway, there was a soft bounce and then a long slow roll. The passengers let out the quiet sighs people always do when flights land safely. When the door finally opened and everyone stood up, stretching and gathering their bags, the aisle filled with that polite shuffle of bodies and backpacks. Elaine waited her turn, calm as always, and then stepped out into the bright hallway of the new airport. This terminal was busier, with the sound of footsteps echoing across the wide floor. She followed the signs toward baggage claim, walking at an easy pace. She had learned to let the rush belong to others. But before she reached the escalator, she heard her name. Not the casual way strangers say it when they guess. This was different. It was careful, respectful, unsure. "Excuse me, Senator Parker." She turned gently and saw the same supervisor from the first airport walking toward her. The distance had changed, the airport had changed, but the expression on their face told her they had carried the moment with them all morning. They stopped a few feet away, not wanting to invade her space. "I'm so glad I caught you," they said softly. "I wanted to speak with you properly. Earlier, I didn't handle things the way I should have." Their voice didn't wobble. It didn't need to. It simply carried honesty, which is stronger than any performance. Elaine listened, open and present. The supervisor continued. "We always talk about customer care. We say everyone should be treated with respect. But today I was distracted, and I didn't make sure my team was doing that. You were calm the whole time. Kinder than we deserved, honestly. I just wanted you to know I've already spoken with the staff. Not to punish them, but to help them see how it felt from your side." There it was. The real moment. Not the reveal of a title. Not the shift in tone. But this humility meeting grace in the middle of a busy airport. Elaine nodded gently. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "That means a lot. And I believe most people want to do the right thing. Sometimes life moves so fast that we forget to slow down and see each other." The supervisor let the words sink in. They seemed lighter now, like someone had lifted a quiet weight from their shoulders. "You reminded us," they said. "And I'm grateful." A nearby announcement called out baggage carousel numbers, and people streamed past them like water around a stone. But for a few small minutes, the world slowed enough for two people to stand in the middle of an airport and talk about kindness as if it were the most important thing in the world. And maybe it was. When their conversation ended, they shook hands. Not in a formal way, but in the gentle way two people do when they respect each other for who they are, not what they carry in their wallets. Elaine went downstairs and waited by the carousel. Suitcases slid past like colors on a slow-moving belt. She watched them, patient, until her small bag appeared. She lifted it with ease and headed toward the exit. Outside, the air felt different. Fresh. Open. A driver stood with her name on a small sign. They smiled warmly and reached for her bag. "Long day?" they asked kindly. She smiled back. "Full day," she said. "But a good one." The car pulled away from the curb and joined the steady line of traffic. The city rolled by in quiet shades of brick and glass. People walked dogs. Kids rode bikes. Life looked ordinary and beautiful. As they drove, Elaine thought about all the people she had met over the years. Some were loud. Some were shy. Some were proud. Some were gentle. And all of them taught her something. Even the ones who made mistakes. Especially them. Because mistakes, when handled with humility, could turn into bridges. She rested her head against the window for a moment and watched the world move by. She didn't think of speeches or meetings or busy schedules. She thought of the staff member who had apologized. She thought of the supervisor who had followed up. She thought of the way respect had finally found its way into the conversation. She whispered a small thank you inside her heart. Not to any person in particular. Just to life itself, for giving her another day to practice what she believed. Later that evening, she sat quietly in her hotel room. The city lights sparkled through the window like tiny stars that had fallen to earth. She poured herself a warm cup of tea and opened her notebook again. This time she wrote more than a few words. She wrote about staying patient, about the power of calm truth, about how important it is not to match coldness with coldness, about how titles can open doors, but kindness can open hearts. She also wrote a small reminder to herself. Give grace. Expect fairness. Stay human first. She closed the notebook, smiled softly, and let the room fall quiet. The day had begun with doubt, moved through discomfort, shifted into understanding, and settled gently into peace. She did not know that some of the people who had seen her earlier were still thinking about her too. A worker from the counter had gone home and told a family member about the traveler who stayed kind even when she had every reason not to. The supervisor had replayed the conversation in their mind while driving home, promising themselves to slow down more. Even a stranger in line remembered her composure and decided to be more patient with someone the next day. Ripples move like that. Soft, unseen, powerful, and that, more than any badge or title, was what mattered. The story still had one more chapter to unfold, but part 4 ended here, with the simple truth that respect, when finally given, has the power to heal what doubt once bruised. Quietly, kindly, and completely human. The airport grew quieter as the evening lights dimmed across the large glass windows. Flights had come and gone. People had hurried through gates, hugged family, rushed for connections, or waited in long lines. But for the airline staff at that counter, the memory of the moment when the calm woman revealed her U.S. Senator ID still felt fresh, almost unreal. Word had spread quickly. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in that quiet ripple that happens when people whisper to each other and suddenly behave differently. Some staff stood a little straighter. Others spoke with softer voices. A few kept replaying the situation in their minds, wishing they had handled it better. The woman herself did not look angry. She did not storm off, raise her voice, or demand anything. Instead, she stayed calm in a way that almost surprised everyone. She had been treated with disrespect, judged because of how she looked, yet she chose peace over loudness. That calm presence said more than any sharp reply could. She finished speaking with the supervisor, and together they walked over to a quieter seating area. They did not argue. They did not make a scene. They simply sat and talked. The staff nearby could not hear the words, but they could see the respect in the supervisor's posture and the steady kindness in the woman's eyes. She explained that she was not asking for special treatment. She was asking for basic respect. She spoke about how people in service jobs deal with many passengers every day, and sometimes stress or habit can make them forget that each person in front of them has a real life, a real heart, and real feelings. She shared that being in a position of power did not protect her from prejudice, and that this was exactly why she worked so hard, so others would be treated better. The supervisor listened closely. There was no rushing, no brushing off responsibility. The conversation mattered. The moment mattered. And the supervisor knew it. When they finished, the supervisor stood and bowed his head slightly in apology. It was quiet, sincere, and from the heart. The woman accepted the apology, not because the moment was small, but because she believed in growth. She believed in teaching, not just punishing. She then walked back to the counter. The same staff members who had chuckled earlier now felt a heavy weight in their chests. It was not fear, it was reflection. They saw her differently now. More importantly, they saw themselves differently. They realized how quickly they had judged, how easily they had forgotten their own training and their own values. She did something unexpected. She smiled at them, not a forced smile, a real one. She spoke gently, telling them that everyone has a bad day sometimes, that people make mistakes, that what matters most is learning and doing better next time. She said her hope was simply that, moving forward, they would treat every passenger with the care and respect they deserved, no matter who they looked like, what they wore, or where they came from. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. They didn't sound like a speech. They sounded like a person speaking to other people, equal, human, honest. The staff apologized again, in a quieter tone than before. This time, the apology was not because they feared her title. It was because they felt truly sorry. As she walked toward her gate, other travelers who had witnessed the moment looked at her with quiet admiration. Some smiled, some nodded, others whispered to the person beside them. But she did not seek attention. She simply continued on, ready to board her flight like any other traveler. On the plane, she sat by the window and looked out over the runway lights. She thought about how many people go through moments like this, moments where they are seen first through stereotype instead of humanity. She hoped that, in some small way, what happened today would help prevent another person from feeling that sting. Meanwhile, back at the counter, the staff gathered together after the rush died down. The supervisor spoke to them, not in a harsh or scolding tone, but in a serious and caring one. He reminded them that the uniform they wore meant something. Their job was not just to check tickets or print boarding passes. Their job was to treat every person with dignity. He encouraged them to ask themselves, every time, how would I want to be treated right now? They nodded. Some felt embarrassed. Some felt emotional. But all of them felt changed. And the story did not stay only inside that airport. Later, during quiet moments at home, a few of the staff shared the lesson with family members. They spoke about the day a U.S. senator stood calmly in front of them and reminded them, without anger, without shouting, to look past labels and appearances, and to see the human being. In the weeks that followed, the airline updated its staff training, adding more focus on empathy and bias awareness. Not because of public pressure, but because it was the right thing to do. The moment had sparked reflection at higher levels too. As for the woman, she went back to her daily responsibilities. Meetings, votes, community visits, long travel days, and late-night work. But every now and then, she thought about that airport day. It strengthened her resolve to keep working for fairness, kindness, and understanding, not only in law, but in everyday life. Her story spread quietly, shared like a gentle reminder instead of a dramatic headline. People heard it and paused for a second. They thought about how they spoke to others. They thought about the way they looked at strangers. Some even caught themselves before making a quick judgment and chose kindness instead. Because sometimes the biggest change begins with a small moment. A moment where someone stands calmly, chooses respect, and turns a hurtful situation into a lesson in humanity. And in that airport, under the bright ceiling lights and constant announcements, something subtle but real had shifted. The staff now greeted passengers with warmer eyes. They listened a little longer. They smiled a little more. They remembered that every traveler had a story, just like the quiet woman who carried a senator's ID and a powerful reminder wrapped in simple grace. The story did not end with the title. It continued in every new act of kindness that followed, in every person who chose empathy instead of assumption. And that, more than any dramatic reaction, became the true meaning of that day.